I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we will discuss eternal optimist Will Miles asked the question, did Todd Grantham actually save the Gators? In 4 bits, we will discuss the quarterback room a few weeks out from spring ball. Billy Napier in 6 bits reiterates his staff's focus on the state of Florida in recruiting for the 2023 cycle as we get going with that. And in honor of JUWAN Howard's fight on the sideline against Wisconsin, we'll wrap up the show debating who would win a UFC-style fight between each of the SEC football coaches. Will, before we kick things off, how's it going, man?
It's going pretty well. I got to be honest. I'm excited for the SEC fight, the UFC fight bracket. So, we got to get going here on some of the early stuff so we can get to the fight so everybody else can join in. Let us know who they think their Final Four is going to be.
We're not totally on the same page on this one. So we got some things to work through. We got to build a Final Four bracket, and then we'll decide who wins from there. But like you said, we got to get there. We'll save that one for dessert there on 2 bits. We'll start out with your article that you had posted on Monday morning on readingreaction.com. Did Todd Grantham actually save the Gators? And with spring ball around the corner here, Will, it sounds like a bit of a ridiculous question when you texted that to me yesterday, but it's the middle of February. We still have a few more thoughts on the impact of the 2021 season. And even though it sounds absurd on its surface, when you break it down, it's not as crazy as you might think. And Will, one of the things I really like that you did here was you tied this working theory to Jim Harbaugh's return at Michigan.
Well, I mean, that was the impetus for it. Is Harbaugh re-signed, and I looked at it and said, well, Ohio State's going to own the Big Ten for the next 5 or 6 years while Harbaugh's there. And to be honest, that was kind of the same way I felt about Florida if they had been successful enough this year to retain Dan Mullen. And the only real difference, so like from a recruiting perspective, they have almost the exact same 24/7 sports roster rankings. Harbaugh from 2015 to 21 and Mullen from 18 to 21. And so you look at the comparison and say, look, they've got the same team basically. The only difference is that Michigan just has to get by Ohio State on a yearly basis in terms of teams that are more talented than them on a regular basis. And Florida has to get by Alabama, Georgia, and LSU every year. And those teams are at least equivalently talented, but over the last 4 years have been more talented overall. And so that's what's happened, right? Florida back in 2020 was able to get past Georgia, but then lost to LSU and Alabama. Florida last year obviously struggled against all of those teams and things sort of fell apart. But the thing is that at Michigan, they made a change in defensive coordinator last year after Harbaugh slipped up. And so they switched from a guy who's leading the defense, and they end up, ranked 93rd in 2020. They bring in a guy, Mike McDonald, who then is able to get them to 17th this year. That's one of the reasons they got in the playoffs. But we saw when they got to the playoffs, they were completely overmatched by Georgia. And so that's really what we were looking, it's a stark comparison. You look at it and say, hey, that might be good enough at Michigan, but at Florida and the SEC, that wasn't going to be good enough. And the difference between the two is that Harbaugh made a change at defensive coordinator, got a defense that was much, much better, was able to get enough out of his offense to get the team to the playoff. Mullen decided to stick with Grantham. The defense remained terrible in 2021. And so the combination of sort of some offensive sputtering, particularly in the Kentucky game and the South Carolina game and a few others, along with a defense that really struggled, and you end up with a 6-7 season and Mullen no longer the head coach. And in terms of timing, this was really the only year they were probably going to be able to get Billy Napier, right? Billy Napier would have probably gone to Virginia Tech if the Florida game hadn't been open, or if the Florida job hadn't been open. In fact, the rumor was he was deciding between Florida and Virginia Tech, and maybe he was using Virginia Tech for leverage. But, the reality is that was probably a viable place for him to go if, in fact, the Florida job wasn't available. And then in 2020, he wasn't really ready to leave, right? I mean, the Auburn job was available. He still wanted to finish things at Louisiana, win the Sun Belt Championship. Now, maybe that's bull, and maybe if the Florida job had opened up, he would have been interested. But the Florida job wasn't going to open up after an 8-4 season for Mullen. So really, the question is it after 2021 or is it after 2022? And Billy Napier might not have been available. So that's sort of the thing, is that Todd Grantham, and I showed in the article that Grantham's defenses were, compared to an elite defense, were worth 8 more losses than Florida wound up or I'm sorry, if he'd had an elite defense, it would have been worth 8 more wins. And then if he just had an average defense, it would have been worth 3 more wins over the 4 years of Mullen's tenure. 8 wins a lot, right? And that's the difference between, you think about 2020, the Texas A&M game, if the defense could have stopped them at all, like just once. Well, they had the one fumble from Stewart. He was able to knock loose and get the turnover. But other than that, there were no stops by the defense the entire game. They stopped them for a field goal at the half because they ran out of time. That was the only time they stopped them the entire game. Same thing. You look at the LSU games. They didn't stop them much at all either. You got the double corner blitzes with nobody back. Max Johnson lighting them up. He hasn't lit up anybody since. And then obviously the Alabama game that was kind of close, and the Oklahoma debacle after that. And with an average defense, Florida probably is in the playoff. With an elite defense, they're absolutely in the playoff. And the thing is, Grantham never had an elite defense at any point before he came to Florida. He never had a top 10 defense. So there was no reason to expect he would have one here. And the fact that Mullen held on to him for an extra year means we're not in sort of that purgatory that Michigan's going to be in. I mean, you're an Ohio State fan. You got to be thrilled. Like, what is he, 1-6 or 1-7 against Ohio State? It's like, yeah, you got him last year, but if you're going to win 7 out of 8 against your rival, take it,
Well, early on in his tenure, Harbaugh, the difference with Harbaugh and Mullen is Michigan did put together a few really impressive classes early on, and then things just weren't connecting. And so they kind of fell off a little bit in terms of recruiting. They fell back more into that average recruiting spot versus elite, top 5 type class. And meanwhile, Ohio State's stringing together classes, outside of Athens and Tuscaloosa. Columbus, Ohio is doing pretty well for itself on the recruiting trail. And that's really just, there's a massive difference there right now. So in terms of just the overall roster, this particular year, you saw some weaknesses on that Ohio State defensive front, which Michigan had a strong running game this year. They absolutely chewed up that defensive front in their matchup. And just Harbaugh, it was an experienced seasoned Michigan team versus kind of a younger Ohio State team. It was kind of a transition year for the Buckeyes. So they caught him at the right time. And that's exactly what the fear was with Dan Mullen here, where it's not that Mullen can't coach a team up. It's not that Mullen can't get a team ready and we can knock off Georgia every couple of years here and there with Dan Mullen. It's that you're not going to be competing year in and year out with the Georgias and Alabamas of the world for that conference title. You're just not going to be doing that. And like you said, one win in the Harbaugh era so far against Ohio State. Good luck next year in Columbus. Good luck. It's probably not going to happen. So yeah, I mean, as silly as the title sounds, did Todd Grantham save the Gators? You got a new staff in here where the hope is that you're going to be able to recruit with the big boys, because that's been the ultimate problem with this program.
Well, I mean, look, so Harbaugh is 1-8 against teams that have top 5 talent. Now, a lot of that is Ohio State, but some of that's Georgia and some of that's, some SEC teams they've played thus far. That he's 1-10 against top 10 talent. And then he's 7-14 against teams with top 20 talent in the 24/7 sports ranking. So, I mean, he's
That's
lucky
not good
that
for Michigan right there.
Well, he's lucky that teams like Wisconsin and Michigan State and Iowa and all that are in the 30 to 50 range. That doesn't happen in the SEC. In the SEC, you end up you make or break it against those sorts of teams. And in fact, Mullen's a better coach. I mean, he was 2-7 against top 5 talent, so one game better than Harbaugh. He's 5-9 against top 10 talent, so 36% winning percentage, and then he's 12-10 against top 20 talent. So he was getting the job done against teams that were in the top 20, teams that were 12, 13, 14, like the teams like Auburn, teams like Mississippi State, teams like Ole Miss. Like those are the teams he was getting the job done against. Obviously, he had the losses to Kentucky, and that's a team that was sitting in like the 30 or 35s. But for the most part, he got the job done until he faced LSU, Alabama, and Georgia. And that's the reality, is that the SEC, it doesn't even matter that Mullen's a better coach than Harbaugh when it comes to delivering on these numbers. Because look at that. He had 9 games against top 5 talent from 2018 to 2021. Harbaugh had 9 games against top 5 talent from 2015 to 2021. So 3 more full seasons, and they had the exact same number of games against teams with top 5, 20 on the 24/7 roster rankings. So look, I mean, it is what it is, right? I mean, the SEC is, Napier said it's a talent acquisition league. Florida's talent acquisition was behind 4 or 5 different teams in the SEC. Michigan's is only behind 1. and they haven't been able to beat that one with any sort of consistency. And so if you think about what Michigan's looking at, they're looking at sort of this hamster wheel of 10-3 seasons where, yeah, they'll beat Minnesota and they'll beat Indiana and they'll beat Rutgers and they'll beat Wisconsin and they might even beat Penn State. But then they'll get drunk, then they'll get absolutely blasted by Ohio State, and the Buckeyes will go play in the playoffs. And that's basically what it's been now for 5 or 6 years. It's really sort of the opposite of where Michigan and Ohio State were, back when John Cooper was at Ohio State. And, then they bring in Tressel, and Tressel sort of turns that around. And now it's been completely flipped, right? I mean, at this point, I have zero expectation for Michigan to beat Ohio State with any regularity. And that's kind of where we were headed with Florida. If Mullen had put together a 9-3 season this past year, they go to a bowl game, they end up 9-4. Things seem like they're kind of going off the rails, but everything's all right. But Grantham's not there anymore. We got to give the new defensive coordinator a year to get things set. You recruit in the 12, 13, 14 range again. And now you're back in the exact same situation against that hamster wheel of mediocrity. And that's what I mean by did Grantham save the Gators? Not that he was really all that great, but that the fact that he was worse than average. So he gave up almost like 24 points per game in his tenure there at Florida. And, an average Florida defense is like 21, or I think like 20 and a half points per game. And an elite Florida defense is like 15. So, he didn't match the elite defense once, and he was significantly worse than average 3 times. And 1-3 when you're looking at average in the SEC, that's a problem. And so it necessitated some changes, and I think those changes are probably good for the program. Now, we don't know whether Napier is going to be able to completely deliver on this stuff, but the fact that we're not on that hamster wheel, I think, is a useful thing, because you can always then choose to get off the hamster wheel again. And if Napier turns out to be a great recruiter, and maybe he's not a good on-field coach and he doesn't get the job done against Smart and Saban and all those guys out there, okay, well, now you bring in the next guy and you try to get that done the same way. But getting things built, having a process, having the facilities, having the recruiting pick up, all those sorts of things are only going to help. And that was not improving under the previous regime.
And you're buying the hope behind door number 2 versus the known quantity behind door number 1. Hey, Will, to your point, while you were talking there, you mentioned Iowa being ranked around 30 in the recruiting rankings. That's exactly what they were this year. And I mentioned the Iowa Hawkeyes because they were the Big Ten West champions that faced Michigan in the Big Ten championship game this year. Ranked number 32, the Vanderbilt Commodores, Will, in the rankings. So just a little bit of a relation there for the
our boy Barton Simmons. Our boy Barton Simmons. We like that hire there at Vanderbilt. You and I have been talking about that forever. And their recruiting class this year is way better than the recruiting classes have been at Vanderbilt. And they're building it in a way that makes a lot of sense that you would want to build at Vanderbilt. I'm sure we'll talk about that at a different time.
I was going to say, I think we have an off-season deep dive in us on the Vanderbilt recruiting tactics there. Looking forward to bringing that to y'all at some point. All right, 4 bits. Let's move on, Will. Billy Napier went on Jacksonville radio this past week, 1010 XL for the reference there, and discussed several aspects about the program. But we got an early look into his thoughts surrounding the quarterback room. He said, there's no question that we're fortunate that Anthony Richardson has had really good experience, and certainly he's made some wild plays, right? Some very impressive plays, and Emory's played really good football at times well. So I think that much like every position on our team, we're in a transition, we're learning a new system, we're getting to know the players, not only their skill sets and how they process information, but who they are as people. But the quarterback room is in really good shape. I did like the fact that he singled out both Richardson and Jones, implying that those guys are probably the leaders in the clubhouse. But I like the conclusion there. Bolster a little confidence that he thinks the quarterback room is in good shape. I know some of us might be nervous with Jones's name being floated out there. But I think Emory Jones does deserve that respect. You might not be not you, the general you out there listening. People out there listening might not be the biggest fan of the way Emory Jones played at times this season, but kudos to him for sticking around, giving it a shot. Napier is clearly open-minded to it. We've seen guys transfer out of the program. I think Napier's made it clear to different guys who he wants there and who he's okay letting go. And I think to see Emory Jones stick around and get a shot, that might be something to keep an eye on here through spring practice. But I'll hold on to this for the end of the segment, Will, but I do have in mind a destination for Emory Jones potentially if he ends up entering the transfer portal. But what do you think about the quarterback room here heading into spring ball, Will?
I mean, I think there's plenty of experience there, right? Obviously, if Emory Jones ends up staying, you've got a guy who started a full season. That matters. I think Anthony Richardson got his feet wet last year. Again, I think that matters. I think Jack Miller hasn't really proven anything at the collegiate level. I think Jalen Kitna, Carlos Del Rio Wilson, and Max Brown haven't really proven anything at the collegiate level. Doesn't necessarily mean anything other than the fact that Brown is really sort of the handpicked guy by Napier. And if they were really comfortable with the 5 guys that they had, they probably don't sign a guy in the 2022 class and use a scholarship and use a counter on Brown. So, look, they're not going to have 6 guys on the roster, 6 scholarship guys on the roster by the time the fall comes around. There's going to be some attrition, and this is one position where you're not going to carry 6 scholarship quarterbacks. It just doesn't make any sense. So there are going to be guys who are asked to leave. The question is who. And I think that's going to be what the competition in the spring is really about, right? Is who buys into Napier's system, who decides to put in the extra work, who builds the camaraderie with the receivers, who is an extension of the coaches out there on the field. And Emory Jones has an opportunity to do that. Now, I think it's going to be a hard sell to the fan base. I think if Emory Jones goes out there and starts, he's going to have to play well because, we spent an entire year watching and salivating at the Anthony Richardson experience, only to have it sputter because of injuries and then sputter because it felt like Mullen didn't want to play him, even though he was maybe the most deserving guy. And then you see him against LSU and you're like, okay, clearly it's time to see this guy out on the field. And then you see him against Georgia and you're like, okay, well, maybe not against Georgia. And then you got the injuries with the dancing and all that sort of stuff. So, I think the promise of Anthony Richardson, I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, the promise of Anthony Richardson, the upside of Anthony Richardson is significant, but can he stay healthy? And then if he can't, do you want a guy like Emory Jones with a lot of experience behind him? But look, I don't think you bring in Brown and I don't think you bring in Miller if you've got a lot of confidence in Del Rio Wilson, Kitna, and Emory Jones staying. I think this is an opportunity for Jones to see what clears up when the dust settles at the end of at the end of the transfer portal. So instead of transferring right away and ending up like Dylan Gabriel at Oklahoma, where there's 7 guys now competing for the starting quarterback job, they're at Oklahoma. Instead of doing that, you wait, you see who's got a spot available after the spring, and then you go to a place that's the best fit for you. And, quite honestly, I know what you're going to say in terms of where you think Emory might transfer to. And that's exactly what's happened in that particular situation, right?
Before we do, though, go into that, is there a shot that this could be? We saw this at Bama a few years ago with Jalen Hurts and Tua, where Jalen held the job down Tua's freshman year. National title game comes around, Tua comes in, bails the tide out in the second half, gets that starting job. Jalen sticks around. Throughout the offseason, there's a lot of talk about who's going to be starting for the Tide. A lot of people believed it would be Tua. It ended up being Tua. Jalen ends up sitting on the bench after having a great career in Tuscaloosa, but then ultimately comes in and saves the day against Georgia in the SEC title game. Is there any chance we see that type of situation where Napier just feels like, hey, Anthony Richardson is an incredible talent, but I'm not sure he's going to stay healthy. We haven't seen him start a full season. Emory, what can we do to get you to stick around? Do you see a scenario that Emory Jones is on this roster not as the starter on opening day?
No, I don't think so. Because I think you shake his hand and you say, go be a starter someplace else if you don't win the job. If he wants to stay, I guess you would. But the 2022 isn't about winning an SEC championship. It's not about winning a national championship. You think about Hurts and Tua, they were both competing for the starting job, right? And then you didn't have the transfer portal at the time, or at least not nearly in the configuration it is now. So if Hurts had decided to transfer after fall camp when he lost the job, then, he's got to sit out a year no matter where he goes, or at least file for an exemption and then sort of be at the whim of the NCAA to do that. So it's a little bit different time in terms of the ability of guys to transfer. The other aspect of it is that I don't think you want Anthony Richardson looking over his shoulder if Emory Jones, if Emory Jones isn't the starter, do you really want AR looking over his shoulder? And the only way I think you can keep Anthony Richardson is if you're going to push out Del Rio Wilson and Kitna. Because you're only going to have, I can't imagine you have more than 4 scholarship quarterbacks. There's just.
So you're expecting multiple transfers after spring practice?
I think so. You usually don't keep more than 4 guys on scholarship at the quarterback position. And right now they got 6. Mm-hmm. And so who's going to, now, if you push out Del Rio Wilson and push out Kitna, then you got a big hole in that recruiting, in the recruiting timelines, right? Because that entire year, then you basically have nobody filling that spot. Whereas if Emory Jones transfers out, now you've got a little bit more continuity throughout, with Miller and Richardson coming in the 2020 class, Kitten and Del Rio Wilson coming in that 2021 class, and then Brown coming in 2022. From a roster management perspective, it makes sense that if Emory Jones doesn't win the job, that he's going to go someplace else. I just, and again, if you're Jones, why stay? Because you have options. And if you lose the job to Anthony Richardson, look, unless Richardson's injured, there's like, let him struggle, because 2022 is about figuring out, in my mind, it's about figuring out what you have at the quarterback position. And if Richardson struggles so badly, you have to replace him, then you should replace him with Jack Miller or Max Brown or Del Rio Wilson or Kitna or whoever's on the roster. You shouldn't replace him with Emory Jones, because whether you squeak out an extra win or two really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. You got to figure out what you got at the quarterback position on your roster. And Emory Jones is not going to be the quarterback in 2023. And so there's no real sense in holding him back in a backup capacity. The only reason you'd have him in there is, and this is the reason that he would stay, is if he's definitively the best guy in camp, then you got to play him. Because you're coming after a regime that had sort of a seniority complex and played guys who, just because of, it seemed like because of how long they had been there and the promises that they'd made during recruiting and those sorts of things. And, the culture, I think, needs to change to where you say, hey, we're going to play the guys who play the best. And if Emory Jones comes in and wins the job, okay, yeah, well, okay, you won the job. But, that's, if he doesn't win the job or it's close, I don't see a reason to keep him around. I don't know why you'd want to stay around.
Well, right. Well, we're just going over a few different scenarios here. Total speculation on our part. Just before Billy Napier took the gig at Louisiana, he was the offensive coordinator under Todd Graham at Arizona State. Graham ends up, I believe he was let go by the school at Arizona State. Herm Edwards comes in, loved the coordinator, offered both Napier and I believe the defensive coordinator the job. Both coordinators were offered the job. Napier elects to take the Louisiana job instead. But I've heard interviews with Billy Napier talking about what an honor it was to be considered by Herm Edwards. Herm Edwards right now has a program that is bleeding right now, dealing with the ramifications of potential NCAA violations, purging assistants that were involved with those investigations. And right now, the roster, it's looking even bleaker because Jaden Daniels, his star pupil, ends up saying he's going to transfer out. Not sure where Jaden Daniels is headed. Speculations could be out west. UCLA's in the mix. I know that. But Emory Jones got a little direct connection from Billy Napier to Herm Edwards there. That might be a good landing spot for Emory Jones if he does transfer. Because if he does transfer, you'd want to go somewhere where you're pretty much guaranteed to play this year. I think Arizona State could be a great fit for Emory Jones if that's the path he ends up taking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, this goes back to what I said about looking at the landscape after spring practice, and that will tell you where you need to go. Like, you'll have, like, all the opportunities will pop up. Somebody's going to, you're going to have somebody have a non-contact injury and tear an ACL, and you're going to need a quarterback. You're going to have, a guy like Daniels transfer out of Arizona State, and they're going to need a quarterback. Hey, Chip Kelly, all of a sudden, one of his guys at UCLA ends up hurting himself, and now you got an opportunity to maybe go there, or maybe somebody like Brian Johnson ends up getting a job someplace in college football, and that makes sense for Emory Jones to go do that. So, look, I don't. Or maybe he wins the job, right? That's the thing, is if he wins the job, then all this is moot. But I do think that from a business perspective, if you want to be a quarterback in the NFL, you're going to have to find a place that fits you, and you're going to have to find a place that gives you the playing time you need. And waiting until after spring gives you that opportunity. To be honest, gives that opportunity to anybody who's sitting in the quarterback room as well, right? I mean, you're going to be able to survey the landscape and decide where you want to go. And the only thing you're really missing is the offensive install in the spring, which is important. But when you think about a guy like Jones, who spent 4 seasons now learning these different systems, or learning the system for Dan Mullen, if he goes someplace else, he should be able to pick up the system. And then it's just a matter of, over the summer, building the camaraderie with your wide receivers and the terminology and all those sorts of things. It's not easy, but if, like I said, if you went someplace now, what if he had decided to transfer to South Carolina, like right out of, say, hey, they need a quarterback, I'm gonna go to South Carolina. And then all of a sudden you have Spencer Rattler coming in, 2 weeks later or something like that. And you're back in the exact same situation.
To your point, Arizona State wasn't available in January. You couldn't have,
Absolutely.
you wouldn't have said, you would have thought they have a rising senior quarterback that's one of the better quarterbacks in the country. Why would I go to Arizona State? That's now all of a sudden on the table. So,
Yeah, so I think Napier, I mean, look, Napier's going to give him a fair shot, I think, to win the job. But I think the expectation is if it's even, they'll probably go with the younger guy.
I don't think he sticks around if that's not the message.
Yeah.
I think that had to have been the message. So that's a quick look. Both you and I, we do expect Anthony Richardson to win this job, but it is interesting. There's a lot of moving parts, and that's one of the biggest dominoes that need to fall on this roster to really start having that 22 season take shape. All right, let's move on to 6 bits here. And we discussed this during our recruiting episode, Will, but a little bit of a look into Billy Napier and how he wants to construct this class in 2023. Only 6 of the 18 high school prospects for the Gators in 2022 were from the state of Florida. That's due to a lot of factors here. Late start in recruiting, Louisiana-based staff that recruited Louisiana and Texas hard. You had Kerry Colbert coming in with some California connections. We saw a couple guys out from California, in this class here, and it just was what it was early on. You had a guy out from Seattle too. Like it wasn't, it was whoever we got relationships with, whoever we're confident in, that's who we're going to focus on. But Napier has stressed in that interview with 1010XL in Jacksonville this week, he stressed we're going to take an inside out approach here. We do a ton of research about player production, about the makeup of the roster. When the University of Florida won the national championships, when they won SEC championships, anywhere from 65 to 80% of the roster is made up of players within 4.5 hours of Gainesville, Florida. So that's not just a silly fact from the 90s, Will. We've talked about this in last week's bonus episode too, where if you take the diameter around Gainesville, Florida, there's plenty of great players within about 3 hours. He said within 4.5. It might be even less this year, where this 2023 class seems absolutely loaded, where you have potentially up to 8 5-star prospects in the state of Florida alone.
Yeah, I mean, if you want significantly more detail, I was like reading off names on that bonus episode, so check that out over at patreon.com/readreaction. But got to get the plug in there. But
it was like Arya Stark reciting the names before she went to sleep every night. Will just had every name in Florida, just rattled them off. I'm like,
but so here's the stat I really like. If you draw a circle around Gainesville and the diameter is 150 miles. So we're talking 2.5 hours. There's 17 players ranked in the top 300 of the 24/7 sports rankings. Ooh. 7 of those guys are in the top 100 and 3 are 5 stars. So if all he does is bring in guys from 150 miles and less, and that doesn't include IMG, which is like 165 miles away. If all he does is bring in those 17 players, he's probably looking at a top 5 class. Add a little bit to that and you're even heavier. But I think it's more important that he's actually talking this way. We never really heard Dan Mullen talk strategy when it came to recruiting. Like, what was he trying to accomplish? How was he trying to accomplish it? And maybe it's because I missed it, but I don't think so. I think it was just that, we're going to go out and get the best players we can for the University of Florida. And, that was sort of the line, but Napier's at least giving us a little bit of an in terms of what he's thinking. And like you said, for the transition class, they kind of had to go after who they could go after, because early signing day, like 80 or 90% of the guys are gone, right? And so then you're going, hey, Harold Perkins is the best guy on the board. Oh, crap, he's from Texas. Well, now you don't have that problem, right? Because everybody's on the board, and a bunch of them are from Florida. And the other thing is that I do really think there's a big difference between the transition class and the bump class. And you go back and look at the 2019 class for Dan Mullen, Christopher Steele is the one who really stands out. He was the highest ranked guy in the class. He's a guy from California. He committed, came to Florida, signed, and then immediately transferred back to USC and is now going to the NFL. It wasn't necessarily that Steele left. It was that Jordan Battle, who was from Fort Lauderdale, wasn't more heavily recruited. Bill Sykes told a story on Gators Breakdown a couple of weeks ago about, Battle's family reaching out to him. It's that a corner, Akeem Dent, from West Palm Beach goes to Florida State. It's that if you take DeJuan Black out of that 2019 class because he had to go to JUCO, Florida had 3 recruits who were ranked in the top 20 of the state, and so did Georgia, Clemson, and Alabama. So you think about, guys like Arch Manning and all that stuff are great, right? And obviously, if Napier pulls a guy like Manning, that's a big deal. But guys like Cormani McLean, Keon Keeley, and those sorts of guys are really the guys that we need to start seeing coming to Gainesville. And if nothing else, he's talking the talk. Now, you got to walk the walk, right? We got to start seeing some commits. We'll know by September. I mean, we'll be able to sit there and look. If there's not a 5-star or 2 5-stars in this class by September, I'm going to start making some noise. But as of right now, he's saying the right things. The process seems to be in place to do these sorts of things. We've seen all the social media. We've seen the players talk about how they're treating them better, how they have parking spaces, how the food's better. They've got the new facilities coming online, all those sorts of things. And then even as rough as it was when Napier left Louisiana and started poaching the staff and the players there, those folks there loved him. And I think that's going to transfer, right? Like, they may not have liked the way the breakup ended up at the end. I'm not sure what they expected, but they may not have liked the way the breakup ended up, but they loved Billy Napier there at Louisiana. And I think, assuming that translates, I think that's going to translate into a guy who is able to convince people who grew up, 100 miles from Gainesville, that Gainesville is the right place to go. Right. And this comes back to the evaluation. Sometimes it's not a good thing to play 100 miles from home. And so knowing when to say no to the guy who, needs to, heck, when I moved to Virginia away from Florida for my family, it forced my wife and I to grow up. And that's a good thing in some cases too. So sometimes saying no to those guys is important as well, because you want people who are going to use the proximity for good, not necessarily as a crutch. But look, at the end of the day, we're
not talking about Billy Napier landing every major recruit in Florida, though. We're talking about getting our share.
Well, the thing is, if you go down the actual Florida top, I think it's like 38 guys maybe are in the top 300 in the state. So more than 10% of the 24/7 top 300 is probably closer to like 12, 13, 14% of the 24/7 top 300 are in the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. So he's not going to be able to sign 35 guys, 38 guys, right? The other thing is I don't think he's just going to focus in Florida. I think he's going to pick and choose. There's an offensive lineman up in, I think, Massachusetts that he's going after. It's like, 1,500 miles away or something, but they've specifically targeted that guy. And they said, hey, in Florida, the offensive line class this year is okay, but it's not fantastic. There's no top end offensive lineman. Let's go get somebody from a different region and target that. Like, I'm okay with that. Yeah. It's when you're relying on the strength of your class to only come from outside of state, or when you're sitting there saying, well, we have to get this 5-star or this class is going to be a failure. That's when it's a problem. And you never want to evaluate a recruiting class on one recruit. You want to see it be a process of building the strength of the class with each successive recruit who comes on. And so, 1 5-star doesn't really solve the problem. You need 2 or 3 this class. You need guys who are in the top 100. You need 7, 8, 9 guys in the top 100, because what you need out of this class is 6 or 7 all SEC players. And the good news is that there's the potential that there are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys who have all SEC potential sitting right in your backyard. And so it's an opportunity for Napier, and he understands that, which is the first part of the battle. And then obviously you got to put everything together and close the deal.
Yeah, Bryce Young's from California for Alabama, the Heisman winner this year. These programs that are recruiting at an elite level, they're going where they need to get the top players. So even though you want that 65 to 80% in state, and luckily we don't have to travel far for those elite players this year, some years it might be a little different. You definitely got to deal with Alabama coming in, picking off a couple guys here and there. Georgia's still going to get a few, but if you can reclaim back, instead of having 3-3 with Georgia and Alabama, right? Yeah, maybe you have 5 and they have 1 or 2, like that type of split. That's going to go a long way in putting this program back to where it needs to be to get to a championship level.
Absolutely, man. At the end of the day, you got to hold down Florida. That's the reality. Is you're in a state with the most talent in all the country. And so you have that advantage, but it's only an advantage if you can make it an advantage, if you can hold those guys at home. Again, with the focus that Napier seems to be putting on NIL, with the focus that Napier seems to be putting on building relationships, not only with the players, but also with their high school coaches. The fact that he's able to bring in a guy from IMG after just a couple of weeks on the job, all those things point towards somebody who's going to be able to get the job done. But obviously we have to see him get the job done.
Time for a dollar, Will. Time for a dollar. Coach fights. We watched that JUWAN Howard fight on the sideline. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. Getting in there, getting a little slap in across. I'm not going to call it a punch. It wasn't a punch. It was definitely some kind of slap. A little bit crazy on the Wisconsin-Michigan sideline. Just made us stop and think, who would win a fight among the SEC football coaches? So what we're going to do here is we're going to first build a Final Four by process of elimination. And Will and I made our separate lists 1 to 14 here. So I'm going to start with the 4 names that we both had near the bottom of our list that we agree. Let's eliminate them real quick. The one thing we absolutely agree on, I said the ranking should be 1 through 14. Will happen to rank this guy number 81, though. Eli Drinkwitz, that dork from Mizzou. He just rubs me the wrong way, Will. He seems like a kid that just learned how to talk trash from his older brother or something like a day or two ago. And he just, the way he it's like he does this really bad impression of Steve Spurrier. And I just rubs me the wrong way, man. I'm not about it. He came out with the hood thing last year, taking a shot at Mullen. And look, Mullen deserves a little jab here and there. Mullen definitely brought that on himself, but it's just not. He's so like I just remember he did the hoodie thing with the Vader thing, and then like he's had this smug smile on his face as he was sipping a Diet Coke. You can't talk trash and then drink a Diet Coke. It doesn't go together. Okay, like at least have a regular Coke if you got. Don't even have one. Better yet, but it just was. The guy drives me nuts. Number 14, or in your book, number 81, off the board right away. Eli Drinkwitz, no chance.
Look, man, he felt the need to pick a fight with Dan Mullen. And this is like picking so Dan Mullen was getting stuffed in the locker by Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. And then Drinkwitz like came by and like stood by the locker and took credit for it. That was kind of what it felt like. So, Drinkwitz, if you're going to talk trash in the SEC, you get for
that Darth Vader costume.
Like, I mean, hey, you talk trash, you wear the Darth Vader costume, and then you go get your butt handed to you by Georgia. Congratulations. Like, go beat the Bulldogs and say something, right? Like,
Diet Coke, buddy.
And then drink the Diet Coke. Yeah. So let's move on. He's off the list. He's getting
off the list. That's an easy one. Just had to put it out there. The next off the list, another fairly easy one that we both agree on. Brian Kelly. This ain't a dance contest. It's a fight. LSU would have been definitely the number 1 seed if Coach O were retained, but they decided to get rid of the best fit in program history and hire Brian Kelly, and now they get dance videos. So I can't help you, LSU. Off the list. Pretty easy call for me, Will.
Well, I mean, he would just claim that he didn't understand the rules to the UFC fight and start talking some sort of Southern drawl. And then Sam Pittman would just like stone him right in the face.
He would come out and think it was the WWE, and he would grab the microphone and be like, "Oh, you people out here," be like, "This is a wrong fighting arena, Brian. You don't do that."
Yeah, I don't know, man. I have some inappropriate comments I can make about Brian Kelly, but this is a children's show. So we'll leave it at I'm like, guys from Boston like talking about that sort of stuff, but they don't ever actually win the fight, do they? Especially not against guys from the South. And you're absolutely right about Orgeron. That dude would have been the number 1 seed for both of us if he was still in. Easy.
Orgeron would be the number 1 national seed. No doubt. He would have been the number 1 national seed.
We would have had to bring somebody with a girly blue T-shirt though into the contest.
Blue shirt. I saw. If you haven't watched the Ed Orgeron interview with Dan Patrick from Super Bowl week, do yourself a favor and check that out after you finish this show, of course. But that was an excellent interview with Coach O, telling some recruiting stories there. Good stuff there. All right, another one. Personally, love the guy. But Mike Leach, not going to cut it. Not going to cut it. You had him pretty low too. You said you wanted to consider the Pirate thing. So I will acknowledge that if this was a battle on the high seas, he'd be on the top of the list. But I just think he's outmatched physically here. I think he would be the guy if there was one coach that could do a Bugs Bunny type maneuver to outsmart a bigger, stronger, dumber opponent, it would be Mike Leach though. But you could probably get away with that for a round or two, and you're not making a run all the way with that maneuver.
Yeah, I'm okay with it just because he's older. If it was Texas Tech Mike Leach, he'd stuff one of these guys in a closet and and then he'd have to pay the price afterwards. But allegedly, I suppose.
Apologies to Greg James. Don't sue us. Hey, Nick Saban was next, and obviously, if you can Hunger Games a representative and just go pick someone to fight for you to represent you, Nick Saban all day. He would recruit the winner, but he's a 70-year-old coach that's 5'6", 150 pounds. The man plays basketball every day. He's in unbelievable shape, but 5'6", 150, he's just not cutting it. And also, it's when you see that guy in the ring, whoever the coach was going up against him in the fight, it almost be like fighting the bad guy in a movie. And you've defeated his whole army, and you're at the center of his lair, and the hero finally gets to bring the bad guy to justice, and the bad guy's got no shot in the fight type of thing. That's what I think the fight would be like with Saban.
So, see, I feel like Saban would be playing chess while everybody's playing checkers. He'd go down, and then he'd go recruit while everybody else is fighting.
Enjoy your coach fight, suckers.
He'd just be like, I'm not getting hit in the face. All right, I'm just gonna go do my job. You guys can all sit here and fight. All right, and that'd basically be it. See, he uses his brain, man. He'd figure out how to turn it to his advantage, even though it would make him look like a pansy when he's fighting.
And hey, Eli, all right, I have regular Coke on my lectern. All right, just so you know. All right, the next, so those are the coaches. 4 coaches right there: Mike Leach, Nick Saban, Brian Kelly, Eli Drinkwitz out. So we're down to the final 10. Let's start with the 2 names that we both agree on that belong in the final 4. So we'll release the first two final 4 bids. Sam Pittman, number 1 here, is we both had him on our top 4. Human ball of high energy, tenaciousness. I think he would fight just like his Hog teams play, and they put the opponent through a physical dogfight. It'd be a long fight for whoever's going to step in the ring against Sam Pittman.
Well, he's an offensive line guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first part. It's just from a personality perspective for a UFC fight, knowing how to use leverage, knowing how to take somebody to the ground. Like, nobody would have a shot against Pittman. So he's used to fighting in a pile, but he's also never been given anything, right? I mean, when he was hired at Arkansas, everybody sort of went, really? They're going for Pittman? And then, he's an offensive line coach at Georgia. So he's worked with Kirby Smart. So he sort of knows what Smart's weaknesses are. I mean, this is the guy that I look at. He was definitively, with Orgeron gone, he was definitively number 1 in my book.
Clear contender for sure. We both agree on that. The other guy we agreed on is Brian Harsin. He looks the part. If you were to cast a football coach in a movie, or a soldier, or a bouncer at a nightclub, Brian Harsin would fit all of those things. And the guy just fought off Auburn boosters and survived. He was dead in the water, found a way to get through it. And if he can handle the maniacs at Auburn, he can handle anyone or anything in my book.
Well, I mean, you forget that he was at Boise for all that time too. And that wasn't exactly an easy job to take over there either. So he's not going to be intimidated, right, by anything that came before him. And like you said, the Auburn boosters, he was able to survive. Now, whether he'll be able to survive the entire year next year, I think is still yet to be seen. But, Tuberville couldn't survive him. Chiswick couldn't survive him. Malzahn couldn't survive him. And Harsin figured out a way to do it. And, granted, he's a quarterback, but that's sort of the problem that I have with most of the guys on this list. Just about everybody's a quarterback except for Pittman and Smart. So you got to you're parsing here, how tough are these guys versus how much of it's just talk because they're quarterbacks.
He's not a particularly tall quarterback either. So that's another thing to consider. So, but we both agreed. We both looked at it objectively, and we both had Pittman and Harsin in that final 4. So really it's time to settle on the final 2 bids of the final 4. We have 7 coaches remaining to join Pittman and Harsin to fight out the spot between Pittman and Harsin. And I'm going to start the conversation with Lane Kiffin. I think he would definitely fight dirty. He'd be the guy, he'd bite an ear, he'd go Tyson on it, maybe bite an ear off. But I think he would fall in love with taking too many chances on a knockout. I think he would have absolutely no defense. He no defense. It would be all knockout punches, and maybe he lands a couple good ones. He'll be a good highlight machine, might pull an upset or 2, but he's not making the final 4.
So you had him at 12th. I had him at 7th, and I had him at 7th because he lost a bunch of weight this offseason. So best shape of his life, man. That's what we always hear when you head in, like, especially with the professional guys who are heading in for a contract. They're the best shape of their life. So Kiffin's in the best shape of his life. And, he's learned some tricks from Saban. So that's sort of the thing that would be going through my head is, has he learned enough tricks to say, hey, I'm going to use this to my advantage and go off and do something else rather than get mauled in the UFC fight ring here. So, I have him sort of middle of the pack. I don't have him Final Four. I think he would eventually get beat by some of these guys we're going to talk about coming up. But I think he's more solid than you have him. You have him as sort of like pulling an upset every once in a while. I have him like solidly middle of the pack, especially since he's in the best shape of his life.
Good points to consider there. Two names that we can discuss at once here, because these are both names that I really didn't have a great feel on these guys fight wise, but they're both former quarterbacks. Billy Napier of Florida, Josh Heupel of Tennessee. Napier is a wild card to me. Lengthy reach at 6'4". Not a lot of bulk though. Not a lot of bulk. I mean, he's a solid guy in general, but not like a lot of he's not the 6'4", like doesn't look like a linebacker or anything. And Heupel, I think he can hang in there and take a hit. I think he'd be a scrappy fighter that a lot of people could get behind. But I just think both of those two would encounter a bad matchup along the way, and don't see either one of them making through it to the Final Four of the UFC fights.
Yeah, I mean, so Napier, I think, did you see how he knifed Louisiana in the back on his way out of town? Like, clearly he's got a little bit of a mean streak when it comes to him. And, it took all their players away from Louisiana, ticked off a fan base who all loved him to start with. I think Napier's got a little bit of a mean streak that Heupel doesn't really have. And you look at it, Napier, he had to make it work as a quarterback at Furman. So he's clearly had to work for everything his entire career. Gets fired from Clemson. There's some rumors that he might have been in a skirmish there at Clemson that might have led him to be. So I wonder whether he's already pinned Dabo is sort of what's going on in the back of my head. And then you look at Heupel, goes to Oklahoma, wins the Heisman Trophy, kind of a pretty boy, at least when he was at Oklahoma. Now, he looks more like me in terms of the overall weight class. So that might be his advantage against Napier. But I'm going to say he's a little bit too pretty. A Heisman Trophy winner is not winning the ultimate fight.
Natty winner.
Natty winner. He didn't win the Heisman?
Yeah. No,
that was right. It was White who won the
White.
Heisman,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
still poster boy for the program there. To your point. So you're off the Heupel train.
I'm off the Heupel train.
Okay, so we agree neither one of those. So what we have left is Shane Beamer, Jimbo Fisher, Kirby Smart, Mark Stoops, and Clark Lee fighting for two spots here. All right. I'm going to start with two names. The two names we disagreed greatest on in our rankings. I had Shane Beamer at number 9. You had the guy at number 3. You had him at number 3. That's quite a difference. I like Shane Beamer. I think he would definitely. You mentioned him being a scrappy fighter. I want to know what you see in Shane Beamer that you're putting him all the way up at number 3.
So he was a walk-on at Virginia Tech as a wide receiver, moved to long snapper. So willing to do whatever it takes to make the team. He's gone through his entire life with people talking about him as Frank Beamer's son. This fight is his opportunity to differentiate himself, because Frank Beamer never won an Ultimate Fighting Championship in the ACC or the Big East when Virginia Tech was there. And I do think there's something to that sort of coach's son thing, right? I mean, you get more chances than other people do, but people wonder whether you deserve those chances. So I think there's probably a little temper underlying there, Shane Beamer. Plus, he has taken to Arby's to mimic the old ball coach and, sort of embrace that sort of stuff. So I think the trash talk would be pretty elite from Beamer as well. Get some guys off their game. They'd start underestimating him because he's tiny. And then, he'll like bite their ankles like a long snapper.
I'm not giving Shane Beamer any credit for trash talk ability based on what I've seen in interviews. No, sorry. He's funny. I give him, he has some funny comments, but he's just very direct. I'm not giving him trash talk points, but I'm not sure I'm totally sold on Beamer that high. Now, alternatively, you had Jimbo Fisher at number 11 out of 14. I had Jimbo Fisher with the caveat at number 3. And it's Jimbo Fisher. Before he gets in the ring, you tell him the only reason you signed that class is because you paid $30 million in NIL deals. And then he goes on red-faced and ready to go. I think Jimbo Fisher, after accusing him of spending $30 million and tell him sliced bread. There's another source besides sliced bread, and he wants to know who the hell it is. I'll tell you after the fight. That Jimbo Fisher, I could put him in the top 4, Will.
Well, so here's the deal. We gotta sort of break it down. Jimbo Fisher has had an enormous amount of talent at Texas A&M since he's gotten there. And what does he do? 9-4, 8-5, 8-4. He had 1 year where he went 9-1, still lost to Alabama that year. So, he's not somebody who's
a second round exit in the tournament.
I'm saying he doesn't do a lot, even when he's the most talented person. And now I'm looking at it and I'm going, Jimbo Fisher is 56 years old, and you got him going up against Pittman, who's going to be a bull in this fight. You got Mark Stoops, you got Clark Lee, you got Shane Beamer, a scrappy long snapper, as opposed to Fisher. Nah, I think Fisher's a quarterback. He's got the bifocals on. He wouldn't be able to see Beamer because he'd be so low. He's like taking him out down below. You fight with his bifocals down. That's it, man. Jimbo Fisher goes into the ring with the bifocals. That's it. I'm out.
Yeah, but NIL Jimbo Fisher. Tell you what, I'll make a compromise with you. I think you're wearing your Virginia Tech goggles with Shane Beamer here. I'll get rid of Shane Beamer for Jimbo. I'll trade that. We'll get those both off the list. All right.
All right. We'll take that. Yeah.
Well, so we're down to 3 candidates for the final 2 spots to join Sam Pittman and Brian Harsin in this final 4. Kirby Smart. We'll start with Kirby Smart. Likely one of the more physical fighters out there. Great defense, but can he figure out how to throw, Will? And in this case, I'm referring to a punch, not a pass. I think he's the good-looking vertical leap. It only goes so far in the ring, and you have to question if his Bama bangs are going to get it. He's not going to wear a visor while he's fighting. It's just going to be all in his eyes. I'm worried about his vision in the ring.
Well, I'm worried that solid vertical is great when you're going down the sideline, but leg sweeps won't work. But, we're not talking leg sweep. This isn't karate we're talking about here. He's not going to be getting hit by Daniel Son in the crane. It's going to be, somebody taking him down to the mat and pounding his head. And, you're absolutely right. He kind of reminds me of a bigger version of Lloyd from Dumb and Dumber. And so, that's I just can't get there, man. That's a guy where I'm like, he'll be competitive. I think he'll be competitive, but then he'll try to call timeout when he doesn't have one or something.
Let's hold on making a final decision here and go to Mark Stoops. I think this is the scrappy underdog in the fight. I think he could easily make a run at the title with at least the title match if he had the right draw.
See, I don't think Stoops is the underdog here. I had Stoops ranked 2nd overall in my ratings. He was a defensive back, but he's filled out since he was defensive back. So now he's big and kind of can compete with Pittman when it comes to like the overall mass picture. And he's used to fighting because he grew up with all his Stoops brothers,
right?
And was sitting there playing football from a young age, working on leverage, all that sort of stuff. I think that Stoops really is a solid competitor here when it comes to the guy who's going to win this thing overall, because he's, like I said, he's bigger. He's a defensive guy, so he's not a quarterback, so he's not going to complain when someone like grabs his hair or something. Stoops a solid pick here.
All right, so we both like Stoops, and this was my number 1 pick, Clark Lee from Vanderbilt, former fullback. Got to think he's fast, powerful, would do some serious damage to about half of these coaches here. Like Eli Drinkwitz would have his face caved in by Clark Lee. Those two, like Clark Lee is just solid looking. I think he looks like he's got that athletic. It's not Mark Stoops middle-aged solid. It's athletic. Like the guy looks like he still gets in the weight room, gets after it pretty much on a regular basis. I like Clark Lee, and I would argue he's definitely in the field for me in the top 4.
Well, you have him ranked number 1. I had him 5th because I had Shane Beamer up there. But, you look at it, 2-10 at Vandy. I'm not real impressed with what he's doing on the field. Certainly he's recruiting at Vandy, which means he's going to be able to distract the opposition. Because if you can recruit at Vandy, you're going to be able to tell them something that they've never heard before when it comes to making your pitch. So, look, I think the jury's still out on Lee. I think I would say that at 40 years old, a former fullback, all those sorts of things. Yeah, we'll let him into the field maybe, but I'm definitely not making him a 1 seed. I think he's probably the underdog coming in here just because, we haven't seen enough. There's not enough on film to understand what he's going to be able to bring to the table here.
All right. So I think we do agree, though, that Kirby gets the boot, and we're going with Stoops and Lee for the final 2.
Yeah, all right. We'll do that as a final four. So it's what? Pittman, Stoops, Harsin, and Lee.
This is a Gators podcast, folks. Don't overthink it too much. So Pittman, Harsin, Stoops, and Lee. I gotta go. I think you're gonna push hard for Pittman as the 1 seed. Am I correct?
I think Pittman's the 1 seed. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna draft the 2 seed. Then I'm gonna take Clark Lee at that 2 seed because I don't want to see him fight Pittman in round 1. So I'll let you pick. Give me Harsin on the 3 seed over Stoops. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think we want to keep Pittman and Harsin separate because I think that the contrast in styles will be interesting in the final if they can make it there.
All right, and then so we got Pittman and Stoops. So we got Pittman and Stoops as the 1 versus 4 here. I think overall, I think this is a great matchup. Can't wait to watch this fight here. But I think Pittman, again, that energy he brings. Stoops is a quiet competitor. He's going to get after it. But I think Pittman, at the end of the day, little more size on Stoops, going to overwhelm Stoops in this one.
I'm not sure. Actually, I've been thinking Pittman was the best here. But now that I've got Pittman and Stoops together, I look at it and I go, Pittman has been underestimated, but Stoops seems to do more with less every year. He had that game against Georgia.
Pittman's done more with less?
I don't know though. You had that game where Stoops kept it close against Georgia the entire game just by running the ball. Like he decided to be like he had the stones to basically say, I'm going to play without a quarterback. Let's just put Lynn Bowden.
Did that for a whole season a couple of years ago.
I did it for an entire season. So he's definitely not going to be afraid to make adjustments as things go along. I guess would be my point. So I would sort of lean towards Stoops here because I think
Stoops upset. I can get behind. I like the explanation. I'll get behind the explanation there. We're going Stoops upset.
Sure, let's go Stoops upset.
All right, I do. I think Harsin and Lee is going to be an absolute bloodbath. I think that the two of those guys are going to go about as long as you could go on the fight. And I think it's going to come down. I don't even think it's a full-on knockout. I think that's just going to be a heck of a fight. But I do think Lee, I had him as my 1 seed from the get-go. I like Lee in this one. I think he's got as much as Harsin can hang in there and survive when he looks like he's dead in the water. We saw him struggle on the back half of the season. Can he finish a fight? I don't know, Will.
Well, so again, I don't know that we have a whole lot of tape on Lee to make this determination. However, Harsin, your whole justification for having him here, and quite honestly, my justification for having him here is that he's young and that he fought off Auburn's boosters. But let's be honest, the open hand slap we saw from JUWAN Howard is probably all it would take to fight off Auburn's boosters. You'll need more than that to fight off Clark Lee. So yeah, I'll take it. Clark Lee and Mark Stoops in the final.
So typical SEC championship here. We have Kentucky and Vanderbilt. Some combination of basketball and baseball here going on, but Mark Stoops with the upset, a little bit, maybe a controversial pick there to the finals versus Clark Lee. Again, why don't you sell me on the case for Stoops before we make a decision?
Again, I mean, I think if you look at Lee, he's a fullback. He's 40 years old, so he's got a lot of youth on Stoops. But Stoops has the experience, right? He's going to be able to look at the film and understand where he can isolate the different weaknesses that Lee has. And what did we see what have we seen from Vanderbilt schematically that's going to that convinces us that Lee's going to do anything other than go out there and basically, curl up in the fetal position when he's got less talent than the opposition. I think Stoops at this point, does more with less on the football field, and certainly has the weight advantage when it comes to Lee. And if this was like a boxing match and it just dealt with quickness, I'd say, yeah, Lee all the way. But this ain't a boxing match. This is sitting in the octagon, man. And so, all he's got to do is get him on the ground, and that'll be the end of it. So that's the argument for Stoops, is if he can get him on the ground, the fight's over. If Lee can keep it up, keep him upright, then I think he's got a shot.
I think Lee, though, you're underestimating a fullback here. I think he's got fullback tenacity, which means he probably could have played linebacker too. He's got quickness, power, strength. He's used to the Mark Stoops of the world, man. This guy can hit. You're a fullback and you put your nose down to go, you hit the hole and you hit a linebacker. There's not much in this world that you can't handle. And Clark Lee, this is going to be the height of Vanderbilt football accomplishment. You are never getting here again to a final, any type of SEC final as the Vanderbilt football program. Love what you're doing on the recruiting trail. Super interesting. SEC titles aren't happening much at Vandy. I think Clark Lee is leaving it on the field for his alma mater. He's going to get it done. Clark Lee gets the win over Mark Stoops, in my opinion. Will.
Well, so Stoops has been there for like a decade. Lee's only been there for a year. Lee's probably going to leave for greener pastures in a couple of years once this stuff starts, once he starts to succeed there at Vanderbilt a little bit. And so, does he already have one eye out the door? Is he trying to make sure that he doesn't ruin his pretty face before he goes and has to mug for the camera at a new, bigger Power 5 job? I don't know. I got to say, I don't really care who wins this finale. The only thing I care about is that they both drag Drinkwitz down from the stands and beat the crap out of him together. That really is the way this should end, is just with all the SEC coaches standing over Drinkwitz and making sure that he only taunts Dan Mullen from now on.
Well, if you're abdicating responsibility for me to choose a winner, then Clark Lee is your SEC Coach Fights champion. The JUWAN Howard SEC Coach Fights Champion Award goes to Clark Lee at Vanderbilt. Fired up for the Commodores. Big accomplishment for Vandy here.
I got to be honest, dude. I've been looking forward to this conversation way too much. So hopefully people enjoyed it and it wasn't too stupid. But, hey, I just, the worst part is, and maybe we should do this for the bonus, but the worst part is I got a bunch of stuff that's inappropriate on the cutting room floor for each of these coaches. So, tell us what you think, guys. Let us know who you think could win the SEC Battle Royale. Be interested to hear.
Definitely want opinions. Did we get it right with Clark Lee? Did we get it right with Clark Lee?
I just envision like Orgeron coming in at the end, like the Undertaker. Like you hear the music, you got Jim Ross going, "Oh my God, it's Orgeron!" He comes in, Farmer Fran, on his way down the ramp, jumping in, taking these guys out. Because I'll tell you what, Stoops and Lee would be a heck of a battle. I think Orgeron take them both together.
Yeah, just like Orgeron comes in out of nowhere, like just with Louisiana Saturday Night playing. Just get that right out of the ring. Yeah. I love that. All right,
well,
Coach
JUWAN Howard,
LSU, you could have had a win, but you hired Brian Kelly. Just keep that in mind. So Vandy gets the title. Congratulations to Clark Lee and the Vanderbilt Commodores. Good bracket there. Good fight for the SEC. Hey, again, dollar, a little different than what we normally do here on Stand Up and Holler, but we like to have a little fun here in the off season. Appreciate you all taking the time to join us, and we will be back next week with another new episode. Before we go, Will, you got any final words?
Just thanks to everybody for supporting us. Again, we'll have a bonus episode up. We'll be talking about the S&P Plus top 25. That'll be over at the Patreon channel. So go over there and check us out. For $2 a month, you can get access to bonus Stand Up and Hollers and the YouTube videos without any commercials over there as well. So, we really just appreciate everybody helping us out over there. And certainly if you like this sort of stuff, let us know. If you don't like it, let us know as well. We probably won't stop doing it because we enjoy doing it. But, especially the last segment, if you enjoy that sort of stuff, give us some ideas, right? I mean, we're open to doing some stuff that's a little bit off the wall, not necessarily, we've got 4 bits. So if 3 of them are Gator based, then, do something that's a little bit fun every once in a while. It's entertaining for us, at least. Hopefully it was for everybody out there as well.
Have a great week to everyone out there. Thank you so much for tuning in again to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Be sure to check out Will's article, of course, on the Read and Reaction blog, readandreaction.com. And if you want to join our Patreon community, we're posting tons of content up there each week. We appreciate all the support. Have a great week and go Gators. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.